Hi everybody, this is Michael from Essential Music. Once upon a time there was a band that was somehow able to take the disparate elements of English music hall, cabaret, hard rock, proto-thrash, prog rock, ballads, anthems. Their live shows were incendiary and their frontman was a legendary performer. They've become one of the most beloved and of course, best-selling bands in the world in their heyday. And we're going to find out all about them right now.
And that's exactly what Queen did for 2 decades, entertaining fans all over the world, including future stars, as you can see here. Brian May is a virtuoso guitarist from Queen. Not my personal favorite guitarist of all times, but he is completely distinctive, an excellent guitarist, and nobody really sounds like him. The Red Special was built by Brian as a teenager with his dad out of scraps. Took him a couple years to do it, and he's used it to record virtually every single Queen classic. Roger Taylor is one of my very favorite drummers, certainly makes my top 10 list of rock drummers. The guy had it all. Impeccable time, heaviness, great ideas, swing. He was a great songwriter, excellent singer, and had the looks and the attitude. Freddie Mercury was one of the true giants as a singer, songwriter, and especially stage performer, frontman. And his extravagant stage persona was, by all accounts, used to protect himself in his private nature from the public scrutiny. A sensitive guy, really. Queen first performed as Queen on this date, but they hadn't really gelled with any bass players. They kept coming and going. Bassist John Deacon was the last to join Queen, and as is typical of bass players, he liked to stay kind of in the back and do his own thing and make everybody sound good. And that's exactly what he did. He made everybody sound really good, and he was a solid bass player with great songwriting chops. The extremely tight rhythm section of Roger Taylor and John Deacon were the solid foundation upon which Queen was able to, with their help, construct so many classic songs. Like so many beginning bands, Queen spent their formative years trying to gel musically together, figure out how to write what could maybe be a hit song one day, and basically survive playing for little or no money to whoever would listen to them. By early 1972, Queen had scraped together enough money to record a 4-song demo. 3 of those, which I consider to be among the best songs that would appear on their first album later, were Keep Yourself Alive, The Night Comes Down, and Son and Daughter. So they shopped this demo around London, and of course nobody was interested. So luckily they were discovered by a guy named John Anthony, and he would go on to manage Roxy Music and Genesis later on. But he got them into Trident Studios, where they were able to set up an arrangement to record in off-peak hours. Queen review. The first album is by no means a bad one, but it's very much the sound of a band trying to figure out exactly who they are. Are they a progressive rock band? Are they a metal band? They kind of flirt with both, but they haven't really found that trademark Queen sound yet, which would take another 2 albums to come to fruition. But the album does have excellent songs, excellent musicianship, a lot of attitude, and a lot of darkness. Queen 2 was released in the spring of 1974, and while a slight improvement over their first album, still found the guys trying to find firm musical footing and an identity. Queen had their first top 10 hit in the UK with 7 Seas of Rye, which was written by Freddie Mercury. This was a good start, but the boys knew that they hadn't really shown the world what they could truly do yet. Keenly aware that they had a lot more to offer the world than what they had shown them so far on their first 2 albums, Queen resolved to go into the studio and truly get down to brass tacks and find out who they were. They would be extremely successful, and their next album will be a landmark in that they would become the Queen that we know. Based on the strength of their previous single, Queen found themselves in the enviable position of opening for hard rockers Mott the Hoople at their peak in mid-1974. Unfortunately, the tour had to be canceled 1 month into it when Brian May got sick with hepatitis. This also caused problems due to his absence in the studio while they were recording the new album Sheer Heart Attack. However, things would turn out much better than they began. Third Time was certainly the charm for this excellent album from Queen, one of the most important that they did in the early 70s, and it definitely began to define who Queen was, combining elements of camp, vaudeville, British music hall, heavy metal, proto-thrash, shuffle blues, ragtime, and even some Caribbean experiments. And this album is excellent from start to finish. True landmark for them, 4.5 of 5 stars.
It's the end of 1974, and Queen finds themselves in the strange situation of having made good money, having had hit records on both sides of the Atlantic, and their studio is really not giving them the financial support they need. They made lots of money for their label already, but still find themselves somehow broke. After getting out of their contract with Trident Studios at great expense of themselves, they decide to be very, very ambitious, go for broke on their next album. It's going to very quickly become the most expensive album in history until that time. And its single was not an obvious choice. Overly long for radio play, they said. Strange, they also said. Queen insisted, and the rest would be history, because this would be a game changer.
At the end of 1974, Queen had produced, until then, their best album, had finally had a gold record in the United States, and had finally found their identity as a band. However, that didn't mean they had any money in their pockets. Their management at Trident was notoriously short-shrifted them and basically kept them on a 60-pound per week budget. Came to the point to where John Deacon, who was getting married, could not get a down payment for his house, and even Roger Taylor was warned not to hit the drums too hard or he might break his drumsticks and they could not be replaced. So they sought new management. After 9 bitter months of negotiating, Queen was able to get out of their contract with Trident. Cost them £100,000 though, and 1% future royalties of the next 6 albums they would do. However, they did have more artistic freedom with the next label, and that was soon put to the test as the price studio time began to go up. This became an expensive album to make, and with a very dubious choice of a first single. A Night at the Opera had some great songs on it, and I'll even include Roger Taylor's I'm in Love with My Car, which didn't make the top 4, but it's still a great song. However, it's not a great album. Sheer Heart Attack the year before was better, and Queen would still do a couple of albums in the 70s that were better as a whole than this album. Nonetheless, it was an extremely important album with some great tunes on it, some iconic songs, and iconic imagery, which would even go on to launch a video revolution later. Of 5 stars, I give it 3.5. Using their newfound superstardom, Queen was able to settle into what would become a typical routine of them working on each studio album during the summer in London and releasing it in the autumn. In between crafting the follow-up to their previous smash hit album, they were invited to do a free concert for 150,000 people at Hyde Park. Very successful and iconic show, as it would turn out to be. While A Day at the Races may have been a worthy successor to A Night at the Opera, that doesn't mean it was a worthy successor to a superior album which came before it, for example, Sheer Heart Attack. Perhaps it's because the album was a little bit heavy on ballads, although there were some classic ballads here, and light on rockers, although I will say that one of my very favorite rockers is on this album, and that's Tie Your Mother Down. Overall, the album seemed like it had some good songs on it, but wasn't a great album. 3.5 of 5 stars. The musical landscape had changed considerably between the summer of 1976 and the summer of 77 when Queen went back to the studio. Punk had raised its head, disco was burning up the dance floors everywhere, and Queen were certainly aware of perhaps some of the things that needed to be corrected a little bit in their sound. Now, while they certainly didn't copy anybody, they did let this musical change affect them in a very positive way. They went into the studio, stripped down to the bare basics, and released one of their best albums of the 70s, self-producing. while the album News of the World did have an enormously successful single, a double A side actually, which was We Are the Champions and We Will Rock You. It wasn't as successful single-wise as the other two previous albums had been. Nevertheless, don't kid yourself, it's a fantastic album. Every track is really, really good. It holds together really well as an album, although they do mix styles. They get back to a kind of a rootsier sound, a little bit less pompous, let's suppose. And two of my favorite songs on the album are sung by Roger Taylor, the drummer. An excellent album. 4.5 out of 5 stars. 1977, the year before, had been a watershed year for Queen in many ways. They had self-produced successfully, very quickly, in half the time that it usually took them, stripped down their sound while still remaining Queen. They had even taken on the Punks and kind of made friends with them. The Sex Pistols had been recording with them in the studio next door, and they formed a kind of an unlikely friendship. And now they were ready to have fun. And the first single, with its accompanying poster, Bicycle Fat Bottom Girls, shows it. At this point, having basically nothing more to prove, Queen was ready just to relax and have fun with the next album, Jazz. It was a little controversial upon its release because it was, once again, a mixed bag, Queen experimenting, but they retained the kind of stripped-down hard rock sound that they had perfected on the previous album, News of the World. It's a really good album. Not everything works. For example, I don't personally like the opening single, Mustafa. But it's got one of my very favorite hard rock songs by Queen, Fat Bottom Girls, on it. It's got some other great deep album tracks which rock pretty hard. I give this album 4.5 of 5 stars.
Queen closed out the 70s triumphantly. They had proved everything that they had ever needed to prove to anybody and to themselves. They had escaped from the shadow of prog rock and had become something very, very different and something very unique, the sound of Queen. They'd made some great albums, sold a lot of records, had made a timeless anthem along the way. They had recorded what would be the best-selling British single for the next 10 years. Queen now found themselves in the enviable position of not having to prove anything to anybody, nor even to themselves, with a lot of money in their pockets, fame, fortune, a good reputation, beloved by millions, and the 80s were just ready to begin. That would be another adventure. In the 80s, you would see some incredible highs, some incredible lows, more records broken, tragedy, joy. But that's another story for Chapter 2. The purpose of these videos is to educate people about great music and to give them pointers in the right direction. The official website of the band is a great place to buy music officially, to buy all kinds of cool things like posters, books, shirts. It's a great place to support your band and to do the right thing. Here's the link right here for you to do that. See you next time for part 2.